Hi there. Welcome to Dreamy Histories channel. Tonight, we're taking you on a journey to a sprawling Victorian mansion in the English countryside, where the fate of the world hangs on your ability to solve puzzles that would make your head spin. You're standing at the gates of Bletchley Park in 1940, clutching a mysterious telegram that simply says, "Report immediately, tell no one." The gravel crunches under your feet as you approach the entrance, and honestly, you probably won't last 24 hours in this pressure cooker of genius and secrecy. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Drop your location and local time in the comments below. All right. Let's begin the story. The guard at the gate eyes you suspiciously, checking your papers 3 times before waving you through. Your heart pounds as you walk up the driveway, past perfectly manicured lawns that seem absurdly peaceful considering there's a war raging across the channel. The mansion looms ahead, red brick, white trim, looking more like a wealthy industrialist country retreat than the nerve centre of British intelligence, which, of course, is exactly the point. You've been told nothing except that your university professor recommended you for important war work. The recruitment process was bizarre. A tap on the shoulder after a particularly challenging Latin translation class, followed by a series of increasingly cryptic interviews in London offices that didn't seem to officially exist. One interviewer spent 20 minutes discussing your ability to complete the Times crossword puzzle. Another asked if you could keep a secret, then stared at you in silence for a full minute, apparently judging your soul through your eyeballs. Now you're here, wherever here is. The front door opens before you can knock, and a stern woman in tweed beckons you inside. The entrance hall smells of old wood and fresh floor polish, with a hint of something else, tension, maybe, or the particular mustiness of papers that must never see daylight. Oil paintings of somber Victorians watch you from the walls, and you can't shake the feeling they're judging whether you're clever enough for whatever's about to happen. "You're late," the woman says, "though you're actually 7 minutes early. Follow me. Don't touch anything. Don't speak to anyone. Don't even look at anyone too closely." She leads you through a maze of corridors, past doors marked with incomprehensible codes. Hut 6, Naval Section, Japanese Air. Through one half-open door, you glimpse rows of people hunched over desks, scribbling frantically on graph paper. Through another, you hear the clacking of what sounds like 1,000 typewriters having a mechanical breakdown. The woman's heels click, click, click on the wooden floors, setting a pace that has you almost jogging to keep up. You pass a group of people in the hallway, engaged in what appears to be a heated debate about chess notation. One of them is wearing bedroom slippers and a dinner jacket. Another has what looks like yesterday's breakfast on his shirt. Nobody seems to notice or care. These aren't soldiers, they're academics, mathematicians, linguists, the kinds of people who usually spend their time in dusty libraries arguing about semicolons in ancient texts. Yet there's something different about them here, an intensity that makes the air practically vibrate. The woman stops abruptly at an unmarked door. "Wait here," she commands, then disappears inside. You're left standing in the corridor, trying not to stare at a man walking past wearing a gas mask for no apparent reason. Through a nearby window, you can see more huts, wooden structures that look like they were thrown up in a hurry, connected by covered walkways. People scurry between them like ants, clutching folders to their chests as if they contain the secrets of the universe. Which, you're beginning to suspect, they might. Historians still argue about exactly how many people knew what Bletchley Park really was during those early days. The locals in the village thought it was a mental hospital, which wasn't entirely wrong considering some of the behavior they witnessed. Others assumed it was a government communications center, which was technically true, but missed the point entirely. The reality was so secret that Churchill called the Codebreakers the geese that laid the golden eggs but never cackled. The door opens again. A different person emerges, a young man with ink-stained fingers and the kind of pallor that suggests he hasn't seen sunlight since 1939. "Right then," he says, with the false cheer of someone about to deliver bad news. "Ready for your entrance examination." Your stomach drops. Nobody mentioned an exam. You follow him into a small room containing nothing but a desk, a chair, and a single sheet of paper covered in what looks like complete gibberish. Letters and numbers dance across the page in patterns that hurt to look at. "You have 1 hour," the man says. "If you can't solve at least the first section, well," he shrugs, "the train back to London leaves at 4. The door clicks shut behind him, with the finality of a coffin lid. You're alone with the paper, and your first thought is that there's been some terrible mistake. The examination looks like someone let a typewriter-wielding chimpanzee loose after feeding it a dictionary of pure nonsense. Groups of 5 letters march across the page. QWERT UIOP ASDFG HJKLZ. Below that, numbers that seem to follow no mathematical law known to humanity. And at the bottom, a simple question in plain English. What comes next? You sink into the chair, which squeaks ominously. The room smells of chalk dust and desperation, probably from the last poor soul who sat here. Through the single window, you can see a gardener trimming a hedge with the kind of methodical precision that suggests he's been doing it since Queen Victoria was on the throne. Lucky bastard. His job makes sense. 20 minutes pass. You've tried every approach you can think of, treating it as a substitution cipher, looking for mathematical progressions, even holding the paper up to the light in case there's invisible ink. Nothing. The letters mock you with their randomness. You're about to admit defeat when something catches your eye. The first group, QWERT. It's not random at all. It's the top row of a typewriter keyboard. Your pulse quickens. UIOP. That's the rest of the top row. ASDFG and HJKLZ are the beginning and end of the middle row. Someone's been typing by position, not by letter. But what does "what comes next" mean? You grab the pencil and sketch out a typewriter keyboard from memory. If the pattern is moving from left to right, top to bottom, then the next group should be ZECCVB, the bottom row. You scribble it down and move to the numbers. Now that you've cracked one pattern, your brain shifts into a different gear. The numbers aren't mathematical, they're dates, but written in an unusual format. Once you realize they're using the continental system, but with the century digits reversed, the sequence becomes clear. You're solving puzzles that would have most people reaching for the gin bottle. And oddly enough, you're starting to enjoy it. The door opens exactly 1 hour later. The pale young man looks at your paper, and his eyebrows perform a small ballet of surprise. "Well," he says, "that's actually correct, all of it." He sounds personally offended by your success. "Right then, follow me. And do try to keep up. We haven't got all day." You're hustled through more corridors, down a staircase that seems to have been designed by someone with a grudge against human ankles, and into a larger room where about 20 other people sit at individual desks. They're all scribbling away at their own papers, and the concentration in the room is so thick you could spread it on toast. A woman at the front desk looks up as you enter. She's wearing pearls, an expression that could freeze hell. Another one? She sighs, as if recruits are an unfortunate infestation. Very well. You'll take the advanced examination now. Advanced? You want to point out that you've just solved the regular one. Thanks very much. But something in her gaze suggests that protest would be unwise. She hands you a new sheet of paper. This one contains what appears to be a children's story about a rabbit going to market. Except every third word has been replaced with numbers, and the whole thing is written backwards, in German. You have 2 hours, she announces. No talking, no looking at other papers. If you need the lavatory, you should have thought of that earlier. You settle in for what promises to be the longest 2 hours of your life. Around you, pencils scratch against paper like mice in the walls. Someone a few desks over appears to be silently weeping. Another person is methodically eating their pencil eraser. The mainstream historical accounts of Bletchley recruitment tend to focus on the Oxford and Cambridge connections, the old boy network pulling strings. What they miss is moments like this, the brutal intellectual hazing that separated those who could handle the pressure from those who'd crack like eggs. The rabbit story turns out to be a triple encrypted message about U-boat positions. You only realize this after spending 40 minutes convinced it's actually about vegetables. The numbers aren't random. They correspond to page numbers in a German edition of Grimm's fairy tales, which, thankfully, you remember from your university German professor's obsessive focus on folklore as a window into the Teutonic soul. Each referenced page contains a word that, when extracted and rearranged, creates coordinates. Historians still debate whether these entrance exams were carefully designed psychological tests or just the products of bored cryptographers showing off. One theory suggests that the difficulty wasn't the point. They were watching to see who'd keep trying even when the task seemed impossible. A former Bletchley worker later claimed the real test was whether you'd spot the deliberate mistakes they'd planted to see if you'd blindly follow patterns or think for yourself. You're just starting to decode what might be longitude coordinates when Pearl Necklace, as you've mentally dubbed her, claps her hands. Time's up, pencils down. She collects the papers with the efficiency of a card sharp gathering winnings. Most of your fellow examinees look like they've been through a particularly nasty bout of food poisoning. One young woman is still writing frantically even as her paper is yanked away. You've managed to decode about 60% of the message, identified it as naval intelligence, and even spotted what you think is a deliberate error in the encryption pattern. Whether that's enough, who knows? Results will be given shortly. Pearl Necklace announces, "Wait here, touch nothing, speak to no one. If you're selected, you'll know. If not, you'll be escorted to the station and we'll thank you to forget this establishment exists." The waiting room feels like a cross between a university common room and a morgue. You're all scattered across mismatched chairs, some leather, some wicker, one that appears to be held together entirely by hope and furniture polish. Nobody makes eye contact. The young woman who wouldn't stop writing is now chewing her fingernails with the dedication of someone preparing for a famine. A middle-aged man in the corner is doing the Times crossword with aggressive pencil strokes that suggest he's taking out his frustrations on 7 across. After what feels like several geological ages, doors start opening. Names are called, not yours, not yet, and people disappear into side rooms. Some emerge minutes later, shoulders slumped, and are quietly shown the exit. Others don't come back at all. You're starting to wonder if they've been murdered and buried in the garden when you hear, "Next." You follow yet another stern-faced guardian into an office that smells of pipe tobacco and old leather. Behind a desk that could double as a small aircraft carrier sits a man who looks like he was assembled from spare parts of various Oxford dons. Tweed jacket with elbow patches, check. Pipe that's gone out but which he still sucks on, check. Hair that appears to have been styled by sticking his finger in an electrical socket, double check. "Ah," he says, peering at your test results through spectacles held together with what appears to be string. "Yes. Interesting approach to the rabbit cipher. Completely wrong, of course, but wrong in an intelligent way." Your heart sinks. He notices and chuckles, a sound like a rusty gate trying to remember how to work. "Oh, don't look so glum. Being wrong intelligently is far more valuable than being right stupidly. You spotted the planted error, which only 3 people in your group managed. You also identified the naval connection despite my colleague's rather ham-fisted attempt to disguise it as agricultural intelligence." He sets down the papers and really looks at you for the first time. "Tell me, what do you know about codes?" "Not much." You admit. "I can do the Times crossword, usually." "Excellent. The ones who think they know everything are useless to us. Can't teach them anything new." He pulls out a fresh piece of paper and sketches something that looks like a demented person's attempt at drawing a piano keyboard. "What do you see?" "Letter frequencies." "Precisely. Oh, you'll do nicely. You'll do very nicely indeed." He stands, extending a hand. "Welcome to the Government Code and Cipher School. Terrible name, I know. Sounds like somewhere they send dim-witted civil servants to learn their ABCs. I'm Professor Hugh Alexander, though everyone just calls me Hugh, chess player, codebreaker, and currently the man who's about to turn your brain inside out." The handshake feels like sealing your fate. Hugh leads you out through a different door, apparently. Bletchley Park operates on the principle that no one should ever use the same route twice. You emerge into brilliant sunshine that makes you blink like a mole, across a lawn that's trying very hard to pretend there's not a war on. You can see the wooden huts more clearly. They look like they were designed by someone who'd heard of architecture, but never actually seen any. "Hut 6, Hugh says, pointing to one that's slightly less decrepit than the others. "That's where you'll be starting. German Army and Air Force communications. Fascinating stuff. If you enjoy having your sanity slowly dissolved by substitution tables." He starts walking, assuming you'll follow. You do, because what else are you going to do? The hut's interior is exactly as glamorous as you'd expect from the exterior, which is to say, not at all. Long tables run down the center, covered in papers, books, and machines that look like typewriters that have undergone some terrible mutation. The noise is incredible, clicking, clacking, occasional cursing in multiple languages. About 30 people are crammed into a space designed for half that number, and the smell is distinctive, ode to unwashed genius, with top notes of anxiety, sweat, and bottom notes of whatever that suspicious stain on the floor might be. "Everyone!" Hugh claps his hands. The noise continues unabated. "Everyone!" Still nothing. He picks up what appears to be a cricket bat from beside the door and bangs it on a table. That gets their attention. "New recruit. Try not to break this one." 30 pairs of eyes swivel to stare at you with the warm welcome of scientists examining a new specimen. One of them, you can't tell if it's a very feminine man or a very masculine woman, snorts. Another one. "What happened to the last 3? "Cracked," Hugh says cheerfully. "Literally, in Thompson's case. Found him trying to decode his breakfast porridge. Thought the lumps were Morse code." He turns to you. "You're not going to decode your breakfast, are you?" "I don't think so." "Splendid. Margaret will show you the ropes. Margaret? A woman emerges from behind a stack of papers that would make a librarian weep. She's wearing men's trousers, a cardigan with more holes than yarn, and an expression that suggests she hasn't slept since the war started. Another lamb for the slaughter? She asks. But there's kindness in her eyes. Come on then. Let's see if we can get through the basics before you run screaming into the night. Margaret leads you to a relatively clear section of table. Right, first things first. Everything you see here, everything you hear, everything you even think about thinking, it doesn't exist. You don't work here. This place is a wireless communications station. And if anyone asks, you're terrifically boring and know nothing interesting whatsoever. You nod, trying to look trustworthy and boring simultaneously. Second, forget everything you think you know about Germany military efficiency. Their encryption methods are brilliant, but they're also human. Humans are lazy. Humans make patterns. Humans like their girlfriends' names and their birthdays and the word Hitler far more than they should. She pulls out a sheet covered in 5-letter groups. This is what we're dealing with. Looks like nonsense, doesn't it? It does. Complete nonsense. But it's not, she continues. It's someone's orders. Someone's desperate plea for supplies. Someone's report that could save or doom thousands. Our job is to reach through all that mechanical encryption and touch the human on the other side. Rather poetic when you think about it. Rather horrifying when you realize what some of those humans are saying. Historians still argue about whether the codebreakers saw themselves as warriors or puzzlers in those early days. The truth, as Margaret's introduction suggests, was probably both. You were solving abstract problems that had very concrete consequences, playing intellectual games where losing meant ships sank and cities burned. Margaret guides you deeper into the organized chaos of Hut 6, past people who look like they're either solving the secrets of the universe or having simultaneous nervous breakdowns. She stops at a table where something sits under a black cloth, like a miniature corpse waiting for viewing, with the flourish of a magician revealing a particularly disappointing rabbit. She whips off the cover. "Meet your nemesis," she says. You're looking at what appears to be a typewriter designed by someone with too many engineering degrees and a serious grudge against simplicity. It's all brass and steel, with keys arranged in a familiar quartz pattern. German keyboard layout. Your brain helpfully supplies, but that's where the familiarity ends. Above the keys, 3 wheels peek out like mechanical eyes. Cables snake from plugs in the front like an electronic octopus having a bad hair day. The Enigma machine, Margaret announces, with the reverence usually reserved for religious relics. 3 rotors, each with 26 positions, a plug board with 10 pairs of letter swaps. The Germans change the settings every single day at midnight. Mathematical possibilities? She pauses for effect. About 158 million different combinations, give or take 1 million. Your brain attempts to process this number and politely declines. You reach out to touch one of the rotors, and Margaret slaps your hand away like you're a child reaching for a hot stove. Don't touch. This one's a precious capture. We've only got a handful, and if you break it, you'll be personally explaining to Commander Denniston why we can't train new recruits. She softens slightly. Here, I'll show you how it works. Pretend you're Corporal Schmidt in France, wanting to send a message to Berlin. She types hello on the keys, but instead of hello appearing anywhere, little bulbs light up above different letters entirely. MFNCZX. C. Press H. Get M. But here's the devil's trick. She types H again. This time, P lights up. Same letter in, different letter out. Every time you press a key, the rotors move, changing the entire encryption pathway. It's like having a lock that changes its own combination with every turn. You stare at the machine with new respect and horror. So we need to figure out the exact rotor positions, the ring settings, the plug board connections, all without knowing what the original message says. Oh, it's worse than that, Margaret says cheerfully. The Germans are supposed to choose random settings. 3 rotors selected from a box of 5, arranged in any order. Starting positions chosen by dice roll. Plugboard connections picked from a hat. If they followed protocol perfectly, we'd be stuffed. But they don't? Bless their lazy hearts. No. Humans hate randomness. They pick rotor arrangements that feel right. They choose starting positions that make words, their girlfriend's initials, their hometown. Hit for Hitler. One operator always used BER for Berlin. Another liked Elon. Bit awkward. That one. She pulls out a thick folder. We keep lists. Every lazy habit. Every repeated pattern. Every operator who can't be bothered to properly randomize their settings. The quirky historical tidbit that most accounts miss is that some German operators developed such distinctive transmission styles that British codebreakers could identify them personally. They gave them nicknames, Heavy Hands, who pounded the keys like he was tenderizing schnitzel, Nervous Norbert, who always repeated the first word of his messages 3 times. It was like recognizing someone's handwriting, if handwriting could sink battleships. You spend the next hour learning the basic mechanics, while Margaret shares increasingly depressing statistics. The German Navy uses a 4-rotor Enigma. The Abwehr Intelligence Service has their own variant. The Gestapo probably has something even nastier. Each service thinks their communications are completely secure. And why wouldn't they? The mathematics alone would drive you to drink, which, Margaret mentions, is why the pub in Bletchley village does such good business. Right then, she says eventually, let's see if you can spot patterns. Here's this morning's intercept from a Wehrmacht unit in France. She hands you a sheet covered in the familiar 5-letter groups. What do you notice? You stare at the gibberish. At first, nothing. Then, these 3 groups here, XKQ, YLR, ZMS. They're in sequence, X, Y, Z, KLM, QRS. Margaret D. actually smiles. Very good. That's almost certainly our friend Lazy Ludwig. He thinks he's being clever by using alphabet sequences, not realizing he's giving us a crib, a way into the cipher. What else? The game continues. You identify a message that starts and ends with the same 5-letter group, probably Heil Hitler. Margaret confirms with disgust. Another that has far too many repeated bigrams to be properly encrypted text. Each mistake is a tiny crack in the German armor, a place where human nature defeats mechanical perfection. The thing about the Enigma, Margaret says, as you work, is that it embodies everything the Germans believe about themselves. Precise, mechanical, perfectly ordered. They trust it absolutely because it reflects their self-image. They literally cannot conceive that a bunch of crossword enthusiasts and chess players working in the garden sheds might crack it. Historians still debate whether German overconfidence or Allied brilliance played the bigger role in breaking Enigma. The truth is probably both. Dancing together in a deadly waltz where one partner's misstep meant the other's advantage. By the time Margaret calls a halt, your head feels like someone's been using it as a football. You've learned about discriminants and chain settings, about cribs and bombs, not the explosive kind, she assures you, about traffic analysis and frequency counts. Most importantly, you've learned that breaking Enigma isn't about being a mathematical genius, though that helps. It's about understanding that inside every perfect machine is an imperfect human. And humans are gloriously, reliably stupid. Tomorrow, Margaret says, tidying the papers with the efficiency of someone who's done this 1,000 times. We'll start you on actual intercepts, low-grade stuff, weather reports, supply requests, nothing that'll end the war. But everyone starts somewhere. She pauses, studying you. You did well today, better than the last 3. Anyway, try to get some sleep. You'll need it. Sleep, as it turns out, is a luxury that Bletchley Park considers thoroughly optional. You're billeted in a drafty room above the village pub, sharing with 3 other workers who keep entirely different schedules. One comes in at 2 in the morning, another leaves at 4, and the third appears to sleep during the day, while muttering number sequences that sound suspiciously like encrypted messages. The bed has clearly seen better decades, and the radiator makes noises like a dying whale whenever it bothers to work at all. You arrive at Hut 6 the next morning to find it in a state of controlled panic. Papers fly between desks like white birds. Someone's shouting in Polish. The coffee pot has been knocked over, creating a brown lake that everyone's simply stepping around because who has time for mopping when there's a war on? Ah, perfect timing. Margaret greets you, looking even more frazzled than yesterday. Major intelligence push. Something big's happening in North Africa, and we need every hand on deck. Hope you're ready to swim. She shoves a stack of intercepts at you that could double as a doorstop. Weather reports from the Africa Corps should be simple. They're lazy about weather encryption. Look for patterns, repeated phrases, anything that might give us a crib into the main operational traffic. You settle at your assigned corner of table, trying to ignore the chaos around you. The hut is freezing, apparently. The heating budget went to more important things, like keeping the machines running. Everyone's wearing multiple layers. The woman next to you has on what appears to be 3 cardigans and a scarf that could double as a tent. She's also wearing fingerless gloves, which makes sense until you try to write and realize your fingers are too numb to hold a pencil properly. The weather reports are mind-numbing. Groups of letters that mean nothing, could mean anything. QXYZMNOPURSTUV. You stare until your eyes water. Then you remember what Margaret said about human laziness and start looking for the obvious. Weather reports always include temperature, wind speed, visibility. In German, that's temperature, Windgeschwindigkeit, Sichtweite. If you assume the lazy operator starts his report the same way every time, 3 hours later, you've identified what might be a crib. The same operator, you recognize his fist, the rhythm of his sending, always starts with what could be Wetterbericht, weather report. It's not much, but Margaret seems pleased when you show her. Good, that's very good. Now we can use this to attack the settings. She leads you to another table where a young man with the pallor of a mushroom is surrounded by strips of paper arranged in bewildering patterns. This is the manual version of what the bombs do. John here is our human computing machine. John looks up with eyes that have seen too many letter combinations. Another assistant. Marvelous. My brain was just starting to congeal. His accent is pure Cambridge, but his shirt suggests he hasn't seen Cambridge or a laundry in months. The work is mind-destroying. You slide paper strips past each other, looking for positions where the encrypted text could match your suspected plaintext. Each possible match has to be tested through the Enigma logic, checking if it produces consistent results. It's like solving a jigsaw puzzle where the pieces change shape every time you touch them. and also the picture is invisible. And furthermore, if you don't solve it fast enough, ships sink. The quirky, historical detail that rarely makes it into the official accounts is how physical the code breaking was. Your back aches from hunching over tables. Your fingers cramp from writing. Paper cuts become an occupational hazard. One woman shows you her hands. They're covered in tiny scars from years of shuffling paper strips. Battle wounds, she says with grim pride. Lunch is theoretically at 1 o'clock, but when 1 o'clock comes, nobody moves. The canteen, when you finally make it there at 2:30, serves something that claims to be shepherd's pie, but looks more like shepherd's regret. The tea is strong enough to strip paint, which is probably its most valuable quality. You sit with a group from Hut 8, the Naval Enigma section, who look even more haunted than your lot. "How's the Africa weather?" one asks. "Encrypted," you reply. "Everything's encrypted." She sighs. "My dreams are encrypted. Pretty sure my thoughts are developing rotor settings." The conversation is a strange mix of mathematical theory and mundane complaints. Someone's discussing group theory while bemoaning the lack of decent cigarettes. Another person interrupts a discourse on Bayesian probability to ask if anyone's seen their favorite pencil. It's like being at the world's most intense university. If the university was freezing cold and failing, your exams meant people died. Back in Hut 6, the afternoon shift has arrived. The noise level doubles. Someone's discovered what might be a new German codebook, and excitement ripples through the room like electricity. You return to your weather reports, but now you're looking for connections to the potential new code. Everything's connected in this work. A lazy weather operator might use the same settings as his friend in the command unit, and that friend might be the weak link that cracks open an entire network. Historians still argue whether the pressure at Bletchley was worse than frontline combat. At least soldiers could shoot back. Here, you fight mathematics and time, enemies that don't bleed when you wound them. The stress manifests in odd ways. One codebreaker develops the habit of eating paper when he's thinking. Another compulsively arranges pencils in prime number groupings. You're starting to count everything in groups of 5, like the Enigma output, which probably isn't a good sign. By evening, your suspected crib has led to a partial break in the weather code. It's not much. You can read that tomorrow will be sunny in Tobruk, which hardly seems worth the effort. But John explains that weather codes often share settings with operational codes. Tomorrow's sunshine might lead to next week's tank movements. Every little break is a victory. Margaret tells you as the shift ends. The Germans think their system is a fortress. We're not trying to blow down the walls. We're finding the servant's entrance, the forgotten window, the door someone left unlocked because they were in a hurry. You stumble out into the darkness, your brain still processing letter patterns. The village blackout is total, and you navigate more by memory than sight. In your room, your roommates are already cycling through their bizarre sleep schedules. You collapse into bed, and immediately your mind starts running through substitution patterns. Q becomes A, unless the rotor has moved, in which case, 2 weeks into your code-breaking career, and you're starting to understand why everyone here looks like they've been lightly electrocuted. You wake at 5 thinking about rotor positions. You eat breakfast when you remember to eat at all, while sketching out frequency distributions. You've started dreaming in 5-letter groups, which would be disturbing if you had time to be disturbed about anything. Today, though, something's different. The usual morning chaos in Hut 6 has a sharper edge. Hugh Alexander is there, which is unusual. He normally haunts the night shift like a tweed-wrapped vampire. He's in intense discussion with a woman you've learned is Mavis Lever, one of the few people here who can make the Enigma machine sing like canaries. Right, gather round. Hugh shouts over the din. We've had a breakthrough, and I use that term in its most literal sense. Someone, and I'm not naming names, but it was definitely Wilhelm in Athens, has made the most beautiful mistake. He pins up a series of intercepted messages. They look like all the others, groups of nonsense letters that could hide anything from birthday greetings to invasion plans. But Hugh's grinning like a chess player who's just seen checkmate in 12 moves. Look at this message from yesterday, and this one from today. Notice anything? You stare. Others stare. Someone mutters about needing stronger tea. Then Mavis says, Oh, the absolute fool. Precisely, Hugh beams. Would you care to enlighten our newer recruits? Mavis stands, and you notice she's wearing 2 different shoes, a hazard of dressing in the dark while your mind's on cryptanalysis. He sent the same message twice, same exact text, but with different daily settings. It's like giving us the same locked box with 2 different keys. If we can compare the 2 encryptions, we can work backwards to find the settings. You breathe. It's so simple, so stupid, so absolutely human. Wilhelm was probably tired, or lazy, or hungover, maybe all 3. And now his mistake is about to crack open whatever secret network he's operating. The hut transforms into a hive of focused activity. Tables are cleared, paper strips prepared, mechanical wheels set spinning. You're assigned to work with John and 2 others on the plugboard possibilities. It's tedious work, with 10 pairs of letter swaps. The combinations are astronomical. But now you have constraints. Blessed constraints that eliminate impossible options. Try B connected to F, John suggests, his mushroom pallor now upgraded to excited mushroom. If Wilhelm's following the standard lazy patterns, he'll avoid connecting letters that are next to each other on the keyboard. You work through the possibilities methodically. B to F means S must connect to something else, which limits the options for the 3rd pair. It's like solving the world's most consequential crossword puzzle, where down clues affect across clues affect diagonal clues that don't even exist yet. 3 hours in. Someone shouts, Got it. First rotor position confirmed. A cheer goes up, immediately suppressed because celebration is premature, and Hugh Alexander has strict rules about not jinxing operations. But the energy in the room shifts. You can feel it. That moment when impossible becomes merely very difficult. The mainstream historical accounts love to portray these breakthroughs as eureka moments, sudden flashes of insight. The reality is grubbier and more human. It's John spilling tea on his calculations and having to start over. It's you misreading your own handwriting and spending 20 minutes chasing a phantom solution. It's the woman next to you literally banging her head on the table when a promising lead dead ends. By lunchtime, which everyone ignores, naturally, you've got 2 of the 3 rotor positions. The plugboard is still fighting back, but Wilhelm's lazy patterns are becoming clear. He likes vowels connected to consonants. He avoids letters from his girlfriend's name. Intercept analysis suggests she's called Greta, poor thing. He has a weird aversion to connecting X to anything, possibly because X marks the spot is too obvious even for him. Historical footnote, Mavis mentions while you work. The Germans actually warned against sending similar messages with different settings. It's in their operational manual, bold type and everything. But operators get tired, commanders get impatient, and security procedures get treated like suggestions rather than rules. Historians still debate how much Allied success came from German mistakes versus British cleverness. The answer, watching this process unfold, is clearly both dancing together. British cleverness lay in recognizing that German mistakes were inevitable and building systems to exploit them. At 4 p.m, it happens. The final plugboard connection falls into place with an almost audible click. Suddenly, Wilhelm's message is naked before you. A detailed report about supply shipments to North Africa, complete with dates, quantities, and routes. It's the kind of intelligence that saves lives and sinks ships, wrapped up in Wilhelm's catastrophic laziness. But that's just the beginning. Now that you have his settings, you can read every message he sent that day. And Wilhelm, bless his incompetent soul, has been chatty. Weather reports, accurate ones this time. Personnel movements, complaints about the food. Even German military rations are terrible, apparently. And crucially, references to a new cipher system being implemented next month. This, Hugh says, surveying the decrypted bounty, is what we call the gift that keeps on giving. Wilhelm's given us a window into their new system before they even start using it properly. The work continues into the evening. Each decrypted message reveals more of the network, who talks to whom, which units coordinate, how information flows through the Wehrmacht's nervous system. You're not just reading messages, you're mapping minds, understanding the human infrastructure behind the mechanical encryption. As night falls, you realize you've been working for 13 hours straight. Your back screams, your eyes burn, and you're pretty sure you've forgotten what your own name is. But there's a fierce satisfaction in it. The feeling of reaching through all that mathematical complexity to grab the throat of meaning. Good work today, Hugh says, as the night shift arrives to take over. Wilhelm's mistake will cost them dearly, although, he adds with the particular British mixture of pride and guilt, I almost feel sorry for the poor bastard when his commanders find out what he's done. You don't want to think about what happens to German cipher clerks who make mistakes. Instead, you stumble out into the darkness, navigate to your drafty room, and collapse into bed. Tomorrow, there will be new messages, new challenges, new opportunities for human error to defeat mechanical perfection. But tonight, Wilhelm's defeat is your victory, and you've earned the right to dream in something other than 5-letter groups. The tea mug chained to the radiator should have been your first warning that Alan Turing operated on a different frequency than the rest of humanity. But nothing really prepares you for working with the man who talks to machines like they're particularly slow children and treats humans like they're unfortunately necessary peripherals. You're reassigned to Hut 8 for developmental purposes, which means someone thinks you need to see how the other half lives. The other half, in this case, being the Naval Enigma section, where the stakes are measured in tonnage sunk and sailors drowned. Turing runs this operation with a mixture of genius and social awkwardness that would be comical if lives weren't hanging in the balance. Ah, you're the weather person. He greets you on your first morning. He's younger than you expected, with the kind of intense stare that suggests he's solving polynomials in his head while talking to you. Good. We need someone who understands patterns. The U-boats are being disagreeable. Disagreeable is one way to put it. The Naval Enigma has 4 rotors instead of 3, making it exponentially harder to crack. The Kriegsmarine is also better about security. Fewer lazy Wilhelms, more operators who actually follow protocol. The room reflects this increased difficulty, where Hut 6 has controlled chaos. Hut 8 has the grim determination of people trying to solve puzzles while drowning men scream in their ears. Turing leads you to his corner, which looks like a mathematician's fever dream. Papers covered in symbols that might be advanced calculus or might be lunch orders. A mug chained to the radiator with an actual bicycle chain. 3 alarm clocks set to different times. And in the middle of it all, a half-eaten apple turning brown, which he picks up and takes a bite from without seeming to notice its age. The problem, he says, chewing thoughtfully, is that naval messages are shorter. Less text means fewer patterns to exploit. Also, they're quite rude about not starting messages with Heil Hitler. Throws off our entire cribbing system. You spend the morning learning Turing's particular approach to code breaking, which involves a lot of statistical analysis and talking to himself. He has conversations with imaginary German operators, trying to think like them. Now, if I were Klaus on U-123 and I needed to report my position, but I was also trying not to get torpedoed by the British, what would I? No, that's not right. Klaus is left-handed. Changes everything. How do you know Klaus is left-handed? You ask. Pattern in his keying errors. Favors the right side of the keyboard when he makes mistakes. Suggests left-hand dominance. He says this like it's the most obvious thing in the world. Also, he mentioned it in a message last month. We were reading his traffic for 3 days before they changed the settings. The quirky historical detail that biographies often miss is that Turing was genuinely funny, in his odd way. When someone complains about the cold, he launches into a lengthy explanation of why wearing multiple thin layers is thermodynamically superior to one thick layer, complete with equations. When asked why he chains his mug to the radiator, he responds with perfect seriousness. It's the only way to stop it wandering off. Mugs here have legs. You know, his working methods are equally eccentric. He'll work for 18 hours straight, then disappear for a long run, returning with solutions that occurred to him at mile 7. He has a habit of making important breakthroughs while lying under his desk. Claiming the different perspective helps, once. You find him standing on his head in the corner, blood rushing to his face, muttering about bijective functions. The thing about cryptanalysis, he tells you during one of his more lucid moments, is that it's not about being clever. Well, not just about being clever. It's about understanding that every system, no matter how perfect, exists in the real world, and the real world is messy. He shows you his latest project, a mechanical monstrosity he's designing called the bomb. It's meant to automate the testing of Enigma settings, running through possibilities faster than human minds ever could. The blueprints look like someone crossed a pipe organ with a typewriter and added some torture device elements for flavor. The Germans believe the Enigma is unbreakable because of the mathematics, he explains. And mathematically, they're right. If you had to test every possibility, the universe would end before you finished. But we don't test every possibility. We test the likely ones, the human ones, the lazy ones. The machine eliminates the impossible, and whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Sherlock Holmes was a decent cryptanalyst, you know. Working with Turing means adapting to his rhythms. He'll ignore you for hours, then suddenly demand your opinion on whether German submarine commanders prefer odd or even numbers. He once spent an entire afternoon analyzing the psychological implications of rotor choices, concluding that operators who consistently chose rotors I, 2, and 3 in order were chronically unimaginative and probably had unhappy childhoods. But beneath the eccentricity is staggering brilliance. You watch him take a seemingly impossible naval intercept and tease out meaning through pure mathematical intuition. He sees patterns where others see randomness. find structure in chaos. When he finally cracks a message revealing U-boat positions, he doesn't celebrate. He immediately starts analyzing what the solution tells him about German encryption habits. Historians still debate whether Turing was the genius who won the war or just one brilliant cog in a brilliant machine. Working alongside him, you realize it's both. His genius needs the infrastructure of Bletchley Park, the accumulated knowledge of hundreds of minds, the patient work of people who can translate his insights into action. But without him, without his particular way of thinking that treats encryption like a conversation between minds, the whole enterprise would be infinitely harder. The day ends with Turing teaching you his method for remembering rotor settings, a complex mnemonic involving British railway stations that makes sense only to him. You're about to leave when he calls after you. Oh, and don't use the middle stall in the lavatory. I'm conducting an experiment on bacterial growth patterns. Rather fascinating, actually, but probably not hygienic. You add this to the growing list of Bletchley Park hazards: paper cuts, mental exhaustion, frozen fingers, and now biological experiments in the facilities. But as you walk back to your regular hut, you're thinking differently about the work. Turing's right. It's not about cleverness. It's about understanding the human element in the machine, the ghost in the mathematical system. Even the most perfect lock is operated by imperfect hands. The canteen is buzzing with gossip when you arrive for breakfast, and not the usual complaints about powdered eggs masquerading as food. Apparently, someone did a head count last night and realized something extraordinary. Nearly 8,000 people now work at Bletchley Park, and 3/4 of them are women. You'd noticed, of course, but seeing the numbers laid out stark makes it real. This cramped estate has become a city of women doing the hardest intellectual labor of the war. About time someone counted, says Diana, who runs the index room in Hut 7. She's sitting with a group of women from various huts, all looking amused at the revelation being treated as news. Did they think the messages decoded themselves? That the filing system was maintained by helpful elves? You join them, grateful for a break from the all-male atmosphere of your usual section. The women of Bletchley range from 18-year-old debutantes who should be planning their coming-out balls to grandmother types who've spent decades teaching Latin to ungrateful schoolboys. What unites them is a ferocious intelligence and the slight manic gleam that comes from too many night shifts. The funny thing, says another woman, Joan from Hut 8, is that they recruited us because they thought women would be better at the routine work, typing, filing, that sort of thing. Then they discovered we're just as good at the mathematics, the analysis, the actual code breaking. Better, sometimes, because we're used to having to prove ourselves. The conversation turns to the various indignities of being a female codebreaker. The billeting office that assumes women don't mind sharing beds. They do. The security officer who tried to implement a curfew for female workers until someone pointed out that codes don't stop arriving at 10 p.m. The visiting admiral who asked one of the top cryptanalysts to fetch him tea, then looked stunned when she rattled off the current U-boat positions from memory while pouring. But there's pride too. Fierce pride in work that will never be publicly acknowledged. Diana tells you about cracking a cipher that revealed the location of German supply ships. Joan describes the night she and Mavis Lever broke a message that exposed a planned attack on Matapan. Sarah from Hut 3 talks about translating intercepted messages with tears running down her face, reading German orders that meant British cities would burn, but knowing that forewarned is forearmed. The strangest part, one of them muses, is that we're doing work most men couldn't imagine women capable of. But we can't tell anyone. My mother thinks I'm a secretary. My old school friends think I'm filing papers. Meanwhile, I'm helping design machines that think faster than humans. The historical accounts tend to focus on the male codebreakers, Turing, Welchman, Alexander, and there's no denying their brilliance. But watching these women work, you realize they're the engine that keeps Bletchley running. They operate the bombs, maintain the cross-reference systems, spot the patterns that turn gibberish into intelligence. Without them, the male geniuses would be theoretical mathematicians shouting into the void. You spend the day working in the machine room, where the bombs click and whir like mechanical dragons. The noise is incredible. Imagine 1,000 knitting needles operated by caffeinated giants. The women who run these machines have developed their own sign language to communicate over the din. They call themselves Wrens, after the Women's Royal Naval Service. Though they joke they're more like canaries, early warning systems for when the machines find a possible solution. Operating a bomb is physically demanding. When a possible enigma setting is found, the machine stops with a clunk that vibrates through the floor. The operator has to check the result, adjust the settings, and restart the process. This happens dozens of times per shift. By the end of 8 hours, your arms ache, your ears ring, and you smell like machine oil. But when a true solution drops, when the nonsense letters suddenly resolve into German words, the exhaustion vanishes in a rush of triumph. People think code breaking is all intellectual, says Ruth, who's been running bombs since 1940. But it's physical too. We're athletes of a sort. Just our sport involves wrestling with machinery instead of running tracks. The Wrens have developed their own culture. They name their machines like pets. Agnes is reliable but slow. Beast breaks down constantly, but finds solutions others miss. Cantankerous Cow speaks for itself. They've created elaborate rituals for coaxing good performance. Lucky hairpins that must be worn during difficult runs. Specific tea mugs that bring good fortune. A stuffed rabbit mascot that gets passed to whoever's working on the most critical intercepts. One quirky historical detail that rarely makes the official accounts. The women organize their own educational system. Between shifts, they teach each other languages, mathematics, engineering. You sit in on an impromptu German lesson where a former governess is explaining subjunctive constructions to a group of 18-year-olds who 6 months ago thought cryptography was a type of tomb decoration. The day shift is ending when news arrives that makes everyone stop. A bomb has cracked today's naval settings early, usually. They don't break until evening, sometimes not at all. The intelligence reveals U-boat positions that will save a convoy carrying thousands of tons of supplies and hundreds of lives. The woman who operated the successful bomb, a former shop girl from Birmingham, stands surrounded by colleagues patting her back, and she's crying with relief and exhaustion and the terrible knowledge that her work matters. Historians still argue about whether the women of Bletchley got proper recognition. The answer is obviously no. How could they, when their work was classified for decades? But watching them operate, you understand they didn't do it for recognition. They did it because the work needed doing, because they could do it, because in this strange bubble outside normal society's rules, their intelligence was finally being used for something that mattered. As you leave the machine room, ears still ringing, Ruth calls after you. Tell your hut that Agnes is feeling cooperative today. Good day for trying those stubborn Mediterranean intercepts. You pass the message along. Another link in the human chain that turns mechanical possibilities into saved lives. The women of Bletchley have built their own invisible network within the visible one. supporting each other through the long nights and impossible pressures. It's a sisterhood forged in secrecy and sealed with the knowledge that they're helping win a war. One decoded message at a time. The weight of knowledge sits on your shoulders like a lead coat. 3 months into your time at Bletchley, and you've learned things that could change the course of battles, save thousands of lives, prevent ships from sinking into cold Atlantic darkness. You've also learned the terrible arithmetic of secrecy. Sometimes, to protect the secret of broken codes, people must die. The lesson comes brutally on a grey Tuesday morning. You've been working on Mediterranean traffic, and yesterday's decrypt revealed the exact route of a German convoy carrying ammunition to Rommel. Perfect intelligence, precise timing, ships sitting like ducks on a pond. You write up the intelligence report with trembling fingers, imagining British torpedoes finding their marks. Then Hugh Alexander pulls you aside. His usual cheerful demeanour is gone, replaced by something older and infinitely tired. That convoy intelligence, excellent work. We won't be using it. Your mouth opens to protest, but he continues. If we sink every convoy we know about, the Germans will realize we're reading their messages. They'll change everything. New machines, new procedures, new codebooks. We'll be blind, and more people will die in the long run than we save today. The logic is irrefutable. The reality is nauseating. Somewhere in the Mediterranean, British sailors are probably passing that German convoy right now, close enough to attack, forced to sail by because acting on the intelligence would reveal its source. You want to vomit. Welcome to Ultra, Hugh says quietly. Ultra, the classification beyond top secret, the knowledge that burns holes in your conscience. The hardest part isn't breaking the codes, it's living with what we know. The burden manifests differently in different people. Some develop nervous tics. A woman in Hut 3 compulsively straightens papers whenever discussion turns to casualties. Others retreat into black humour so dark it could fuel the London blackout. You start having dreams where you're shouting warnings that no one can hear, your voice swallowed by the machinery of necessary secrecy. The rules around ultra-intelligence are Byzantine and absolute. Information must be laundered through plausible sources. A reconnaissance plane must accidentally discover what you've known for days. A resistance network must be credited with intelligence actually gleaned from Enigma. Every piece of Ultra must have a cover story, a parallel construction that explains how it could have been obtained through conventional means. We're writing fiction, says James, a former novelist now crafting cover stories. Except our fiction kills people, or saves them, depending on how you look at it. The psychological pressure is crushing. You know which cities will be bombed tomorrow but can't warn anyone. You decrypt messages about planned attacks on specific convoys, then watch the shipping losses mount in the newspaper. Each tonnage figure representing real sailors choking on oil and seawater. The woman who sits next to you breaks down one afternoon, sobbing over a decrypt about POW movements. Her brother is in a German camp. The message mentions his stalag. She knows things about his situation that she can never tell their mother. Even success carries its own bitter taste. When ultra-intelligence leads to victory, sinking the Bismarck, winning at El Alamein, you can't celebrate properly. The official story always credits everything except the truth. Brilliant reconnaissance, lucky breaks, superior tactics, anything but the fact that you were reading the enemy's mail. Historians still debate the psychological toll on Bletchley workers. The official histories focus on the intellectual challenges, the mathematical victories. They don't capture the weight of omniscience, the burden of being gods who must pretend to be mortals. You know when and where death will come calling, but you must let it knock. The compartmentalization required is extreme. You can't discuss your work with anyone outside your immediate section. The woman decrypting Japanese codes in the next hut might as well be on the moon. Cross-pollination of knowledge is forbidden, because the more any one person knows, the more damage they could do if captured or turned. So you sit in your narrow slice of the intelligence picture, knowing your piece intimately but blind to the whole. Romance at Bletchley carries its own peculiar challenges. You can't tell your sweetheart what you do. You can't explain why you arrive at dates exhausted and distracted. You certainly can't mention that you spent the afternoon reading German orders that will lead to British deaths. One couple reportedly conducted their entire courtship without ever discussing their work. Like Victorian lovers avoiding the mention of ankles. The pub in Bletchley village becomes a pressure valve. But even there, conversation is stilted. Everyone's guarding secrets. A casual mention of the weather might touch on someone's decryption work. A joke about food shortages might reveal knowledge of submarine positions. So people drink in careful silence or discuss topics so bland they couldn't possibly matter. The quality of the beer, terrible. The state of the roads, worse. The prospects for the vegetable garden, doomed. The quirky detail that never makes the memoirs. Some people crack under the strain in creative ways. One analyst starts writing poetry in Enigma cipher, encoding his feelings in 5-letter groups. Another begins learning Japanese, not for work, but because it's a puzzle that doesn't involve life and death. A mathematician in Hut 6 takes up watercolors, painting landscapes where nothing is hidden and everything is exactly what it seems. You develop your own coping mechanisms. Long walks where you recite poetry to drown out the decoded voices in your head. A journal written in a personal cipher, which probably breaks a dozen security regulations, but feels necessary for sanity. Teaching yourself to juggle, because dropping balls is consequence-free in a way your real work never is. The worst moments come when the intelligence is personal. A decrypt mentions your hometown. An intercept references your old university. One terrible afternoon, a message contains the name of a ship your cousin serves on. You stare at coordinates that place it directly in the path of U-boats. Knowing you can't warn him, can't tell your aunt to prepare for the worst, can't do anything but add his name to the growing list of people you failed to save by succeeding at your job. The war will end, Diana tells you one evening, finding you staring blankly at your desk. And when it does, we'll have to find a way to live with what we knew and didn't say. That's the real secret of Bletchley Park, not the codes we broke, but the silence we kept. The bombs are having a good day, which in Bletchley Park terms means they're only breaking down every few hours instead of every few minutes. You're in the machine room, watching these mechanical brains chase solutions through millions of possibilities. When Margaret bursts in with the kind of expression that means either catastrophe or breakthrough. They found something in Hut 6, she pants. Something big. They need everyone who understands rotor physics. Rotor physics, the peculiar science of how Enigma wheels interact, creating patterns within chaos. You've spent weeks studying it, mapping the mechanical logic that German engineers thought was random but actually follows subtle rules. If Hut 6 needs rotor specialists, they've found something fundamental. The scene in Hut 6 resembles a disturbed anthill. Papers cover every surface like snow. Someone's drawn enormous diagrams on the wall. Technically, vandalism. But who's counting? At the center of the chaos stands Gordon Welchman, looking like Einstein's younger, more frazzled brother. "Right," he announces, as people gather. "We've discovered something the Germans don't know about their own machine, a flaw so basic they've never noticed it." He points to his wall diagrams. The Enigma can never encode a letter as itself. Press A, get anything except A. It's fundamental to the design. Everyone nods. This is Cryptography 101, the first thing you learn about Enigma. But, Welchman continues, grinning like a maniac, they don't realize what this means for message structure. If we guess a word in the plaintext, say Wetterbericht for weather report, and slide it along the ciphertext, any position where a letter in our guess matches the cipher at that point is wrong. The Enigma's greatest strength is actually a weakness. The room erupts. People immediately see the implications. Instead of checking if a guess is right, which requires testing the entire Enigma setup, you can eliminate where it's wrong just by looking. It's like solving a maze by blocking off dead ends instead of finding the path. "We're calling it the diagonal board," Welchman says, sketching frantically. "It'll make the bombs 10 times more efficient, maybe 100 times. You spend the next hours working through the mathematics. The beauty of the discovery is its simplicity. It uses the Enigma's own perfection against itself. The German engineers were so focused on making their machine mathematically unbreakable. They created a pattern, and patterns, as every codebreaker knows, are the enemy of secrecy. The work is intense. You're redesigning mental models, recalculating probability tables, arguing about implementation details. Someone points out that this principle should have been obvious from the beginning. Someone else notes that the obvious is often the last thing anyone sees. Turing appears at some point, studies the diagrams, and simply says, "Yes, that should work," which from him is equivalent to a standing ovation. The quirky, historical footnote. Welchman's discovery was so fundamental that post-war analysts couldn't believe the Germans hadn't known about it. Surely, they thought, German cryptographers must have understood their own machine's characteristics. But they didn't. They were too close to their creation, too confident in its mathematical elegance to notice its mechanical tells. By evening, prototype modifications for the bombs are being sketched. The diagonal board will be a physical addition. Wires and switches that eliminate impossible positions before the main mechanism even engages. It's like giving the machines a sixth sense for wrong answers. The psychological aspect is crucial. Welchman explains during a brief break. German operators trust the Enigma absolutely. They believe if they follow procedures, their messages are unbreakable. That confidence makes them lazy. They reuse phrases. They choose predictable settings. They send routine messages at routine times. And now we can exploit those human patterns 100 times faster. You think about all the intercepted messages waiting for decryption, all the intelligence gathering dust, because current methods are too slow. With this improvement, messages that would take days to break might crack in hours. Intelligence that arrives too late to use might arrive in time to matter. The night shift arrives to find Hut 6 in a state of euphoric exhaustion. The theoretical work is done. Now begins the practical implementation. Engineers are summoned to modify the bombs. Operators are briefed on new procedures. The entire code-breaking apparatus must adjust to accommodate this gift of German oversight. Historians still argue whether breaking Enigma shortened the war by 2 years or 3. But sitting in that room, watching brilliant minds dissect the enemy's greatest secret, you understand it's not just about time saved. It's about convoy routes changed, bombing raids anticipated, U-boats avoided. Each decoded message is 1,000 butterfly effects, rippling through history in ways no one will ever fully map. As you stumble out into the darkness, brain fried from mathematical exertion, you pass the mansion's grand windows. Inside, lights burn as the next shift takes over. The war machine never sleeps. But tonight, it's been given sharper teeth. The Germans will wake tomorrow, trusting in their unbreakable cipher, never knowing that their perfect machine has betrayed them in the most fundamental way possible. You realize, says John, walking beside you, we've just made ourselves obsolete. If the bombs work that much faster, they'll need fewer analysts. Good, you reply, surprising yourself with the vehemence. The sooner this war ends, the sooner we can all go back to normal lives. I want my biggest worry to be finishing the Times crossword, not knowing which ships will sink tomorrow. But even as you say it, you wonder if normal is possible after this. Can you go back to ordinary puzzles when you've wrestled with codes that decided the fate of nations? Can you pretend ignorance when you've held terrible knowledge? The enigma isn't the only thing that's been fundamentally changed by this war. The pub is still open, barely, and probably illegally, and you join a group of codebreakers drowning their mathematics in warm beer. Someone raises a toast to Gordon Welchman, who beat the Germans with their own stupidity. To the diagonal board, another adds, and the beautiful stupidity of perfection. You drink to that, to flaws in flawless systems, to the human weakness that always creeps into the machine. Tomorrow, the upgraded bombs will start their faster dance through possibility space. Tonight, you've earned the right to celebrate one of those rare moments when David doesn't just fight Goliath. He rewrites the rules of combat. Saturday night at Bletchley Park. And the contrast between the deadly serious work and the desperate need for normalcy has created something surreal. The mansion's ballroom has been cleared for dancing. Glenn Miller echoes from a gramophone that skips every third beat, and several hundred people who spend their days breaking codes are trying to pretend they're normal young people at a normal dance in normal times. You're wearing your best outfit, which isn't saying much. Given wartime rationing and the fact that you packed for government work, not social occasions. Around you, the crowd is a bizarre mixture. Debutantes in pre-war gowns dancing with mathematicians in borrowed jackets. Wrens in uniform spinning past Oxford dons. That chess champion from Hut 6 attempting to foxtrot with one of the typing pool girls, while apparently calculating 8 moves ahead. Extraordinary, isn't it? Says a voice beside you. It's Patricia from Naval Section, looking unusually glamorous in what must be her mother's dress. 10,000 of Britain's brightest minds, and not one of us can make small talk. She's right. The conversations you overhear are painful attempts at normalcy that keep veering into dangerous territory. Lovely weather we're having. Yes, though the pressure systems over the Atlantic suggest, oh, never mind. What do you do? I work in communications. Oh, what kind? The communicating kind. Where are you from? Can't say. Right. Where were you educated? Can't say. What's your name? Probably shouldn't say that either. The dancing is enthusiastic if not skilled. Codebreakers, it turns out, approach dancing like they approach ciphers, with intense concentration and a tendency to overthink. You watch one couple stop mid-waltz to debate whether they're turning clockwise or anti-clockwise, which devolves into a discussion of rotational mathematics that kills any romantic mood. You're dragged onto the floor by Tom from your hut, who dances like he's trying to solve an equation with his feet. The thing is, he shouts over the music, social interaction follows patterns just like codes. If I can map the statistical likelihood of conversation topics, I should be able to optimize for minimum awkwardness. How's that working out, you ask, trying not to wince as he steps on your foot. Terribly. Turns out humans don't respond well to optimization. The quirky historical detail that never makes the official accounts. Bletchley Park had one of the war's most active romantic scenes. Despite, or perhaps because of, the pressure. When you can't talk about your work, can't share your daily life, can't even mention where you spend your days, romance becomes its own kind of code. Couples develop elaborate systems of meaningful looks, coded phrases, subtle hand signals. One pair reportedly conducted an entire courtship through chess moves. Each game a conversation their colleagues couldn't decrypt, but romance under the Official Secrets Act has its complications. You overhear one painful breakup. I can't tell you why I'm always tired. I can't tell you why I'm always distracted. I can't tell you anything that matters. Then what can you tell me? That I care about you. That's not enough. It isn't. The intelligence services, in their infinite wisdom, have rules about fraternization. People from different huts aren't supposed to get too friendly. What if Pillow Talk revealed that Hut 3 is working on Wehrmacht codes while Hut 8 handles naval traffic? The rules are widely ignored, partly because enforcing them would require acknowledging what each hut actually does, which defeats the purpose. Drama inevitably ensues. Love triangles where each vertex works in a different section, creating jealousies seasoned with security violations. A wedding where the bride and groom had to list their occupations as clerical work, and their colleagues couldn't explain how they knew each other. A pregnancy that sent the personnel department into convulsions. Where do you send a woman who knows ultra secrets but can't work night shifts anymore? The funny thing, Patricia says, during a break between dances, is that we're all terrible liars. Put us in front of an enigma machine. We're geniuses. Ask us to convincingly pretend we're normal people with normal jobs. Disaster. She's not wrong. You've watched brilliant cryptanalysts fumble through cover stories that wouldn't fool a child. One woman, asked what she did at the Foreign Office, panicked and said she was filing foreign things. A mathematician told his mother he was counting things for the war effort and couldn't elaborate on what things or why they needed counting. The dance continues, growing more relaxed as the evening wears on and the punch bowl empties under suspicious circumstances. Someone spiked it, probably with that rot-gut gin from the village that tastes like it was distilled from disappointment and sawdust. The dancing gets looser, the laughter louder, the weight of secrets temporarily lighter. You find yourself on the terrace with a group watching the stars. Someone points out constellations, which leads to a discussion of celestial navigation, which somehow becomes a debate about whether German U-boats use stellar positioning. Even here, even trying to relax, the war intrudes. Sometimes I forget what we're doing here isn't normal, says a young woman you recognize from the machine room. I forget that most people don't spend their days reading enemy secrets. Then I go home on leave and realize I can't talk to anyone about anything that matters to me. Historians still debate the social dynamics of Bletchley Park. Was it a pressure cooker of romance and drama, or a collection of nerds too focused on their work to notice each other? The truth, like most truths, is messier. It was both. People fell in love over frequency analysis, broke up over security protocols, conducted affairs in the gaps between shifts, got married in ceremonies where they couldn't tell their families what they really did or how they really met. The evening winds down with someone attempting to teach Scottish country dancing, which descends into chaos when the mathematicians try to optimize the patterns. You escape inside, where smaller groups have formed in corners. In one, people are playing a word game that's definitely actually a cipher exercise. In another, someone's explaining the plot of a detective novel that sounds suspiciously like a real intelligence operation with the names changed. As you head back to your billet, the moon high and the blackout complete, you pass couples stealing moments in the shadows. Tomorrow, they'll go back to their huts, their secrets, their terrible knowledge. Tonight, they're just young people pretending the world isn't burning, that love is possible even when you can't share your true self, that dancing badly to Glenn Miller can temporarily defeat the weight of winning a war, one decoded message at a time. The Japanese section is like entering another world, one where even the alphabet is a cipher unto itself. You've been temporarily reassigned because someone in administration thinks exposure to different cryptographic systems will broaden your analytical capabilities. What it's actually doing is making your brain leak out your ears. "Welcome to the asylum," greets Captain Bedford, who runs the Japanese naval subsection with the demeanor of a man who's given up on sanity. "I hope you like puzzles wrapped in enigmas stuffed inside ideographic nightmares." The workspace looks different from the German sections, where enigma breaking is all about mechanical patterns and mathematical probability. Japanese code breaking requires walls covered in thousands of hand-drawn characters. It's like trying to solve crosswords where every clue is a picture, and the pictures keep changing meaning depending on context. "First lesson," Bedford says, gesturing at a board covered in symbols that look like drunk spiders tried to write poetry. Japanese uses 3 different writing systems simultaneously, sometimes in the same sentence. It's as if English randomly switched between Latin letters, Egyptian hieroglyphs, and mathematical notation, just for fun. Your instructor is Akiko, a second-generation Japanese woman from London, whose presence at Bletchley creates its own special security headaches. She's brilliant, essential, and technically an enemy alien, which means she needs an escort to go to the loo. The bureaucratic absurdity would be funny if it weren't so insulting. The Japanese believe their language itself is a code, Akiko explains, her perfect BBC accent at odds with the characters she's writing. They think Westerners can't possibly understand the subtleties. Unfortunately for them, I exist. She shows you the main Japanese naval code, JN25. Unlike Enigma's mechanical complexity, this is a codebook system, thousands of 5-digit groups representing words, phrases, even entire concepts. But the Japanese, paranoid even by cryptographic standards, then encipher these code groups with daily changing addition tables. It's like writing a message in code, then encoding the code, then probably encoding that just to be sure. The real challenge, Akiko continues, is that Japanese military language is its own beast. They use ancient poetic terms for modern concepts. A submarine might be called steel whale, or hidden dragon beneath waves. A bombing raid is cherry blossoms falling on spring wind. Pretty, but not helpful when you're trying to figure out if they're talking about poetry or planning to attack Port Moresby. The work is painstaking, where German messages follow military efficiency, position reports, supply requests, terse orders. Japanese intercepts read like haikus written by bureaucrats. Everything is indirect, wrapped in layers of politeness and metaphor that would make British understatement look blunt. You spend days learning to recognize common phrases, The Emperor's will appears constantly, a kind of Japanese equivalent to Heil Hitler, but used more creatively. One message uses it 17 times in different contexts, as greeting, closing, emphasis. And what Akiko suspects is the radio operator's way of padding his message to meet minimum length requirements on the quirky, historical detail that often gets overlooked. Japanese codebreakers developed their own superstitions entirely separate from the European sections. They believe certain ink colors bring luck with specific types of messages. Red ink for naval traffic, blue for diplomatic, black for army. There's a lucky cat statue that gets moved to whoever's working on the most crucial intercepts. Someone's hung origami cranes from the ceiling, one for each major success. The Germans are predictable in their unpredictability. Bedford explains, during one of his more lucid moments, they'll use girlfriend names, birthdays, dirty jokes, human stuff. The Japanese are unpredictable in their predictability. They'll reference the same classical poem for months, then suddenly switch to quotes from a military manual from 1823. The cultural gap creates unique challenges. A British codebreaker might guess that a German message mentioning Christmas is dated December 25th, but Japanese messages reference festivals you've never heard of, lunar calendar dates that don't align with Western months, lucky and unlucky days that affect military planning. Akiko spends as much time explaining cultural context as cryptographic techniques. Here, she shows you a partially decoded message. This mentions mountain whale. Any guesses? You stare at it blankly. Mountain whale makes about as much sense as dry water. Wild boar, she says, smiling at your confusion. From an old folk tale where someone who'd never seen the ocean described a boar as a mountain whale. It's their code for tank. Historians still debate whether Japanese codes were harder to break than German ones. The mechanical elegance of Enigma versus the linguistic labyrinth of JN25. But working on both, you realize they represent different kinds of arrogance. The Germans trusted their engineering. The Japanese trusted their culture. Both believed their secrets were safe behind barriers the enemy couldn't cross. The breakthrough comes, as they often do, from human error. A Japanese clerk sends the same message in both the old code, which Bletchley can read, and the new code, which they can't. It's like finding the Rosetta Stone in 5-digit groups. The section erupts in subdued celebration, subdued because it's 3 a.m. and excessive joy might wake the other huts. The beautiful irony, Akiko says, as you work through the implications, is that their cultural superiority complex is their weakness. They can't imagine Gaijin understanding Japanese thinking, so they don't protect against it. Meanwhile, I'm here, raised on both shepherd's pie and sushi, breaking their codes with my mongrel brain. The work continues relentlessly. Japanese expansions in the Pacific mean floods of new traffic, new codebooks, new challenges. You learn to recognize different operator styles. One who always starts messages with florid greetings. Another who can't spell, even in code. A third who obviously hates his job and sends the minimum possible. By the time your rotation ends, you've gained enormous respect for the Japanese section. They're fighting a different war from the Enigma breakers. Less mechanical, more intuitive, requiring not just mathematical brilliance, but deep cultural understanding. It's code breaking as anthropology, linguistics as warfare. Come back any time, Bedford says, as you leave, especially if you develop a talent for thinking in metaphors and moon phases. You return to German codes with relief and a new appreciation for the straightforward brutality of Enigma. At least when Germans encrypt submarine, they mean submarine, not steel fish swimming in darkness beneath cherry blossoms, or whatever poetic nightmare the Japanese would conjure. But you also return with a broader understanding of what Bletchley Park really is. Not just a code-breaking factory, but a place where every human assumption becomes a vulnerability, where culture itself can be decoded, where the war is fought in symbols and meanings across every possible dimension of human communication. The map room in Hut 3 has become a shrine to deception. It's May 1944, and every wall is covered with the intricate web of lies that will sell Operation Overlord to the Germans. You're part of the team using ultra-intelligence to monitor whether the enemy is buying the greatest magic trick of the war, making them look at Calais while the real invasion force prepares for Normandy. The beautiful thing, says Colonel Bevan, running this particular circus, is that we're using their own intelligence system against them. Every message they send asking about Calais, every reconnaissance flight they order over Dover, tells us our deception is working. The scale of the operation is staggering. There's an entire fake army group commanded by Patton, the 1st United States Army Group. FUSAG, complete with radio traffic, dummy tanks, and inflatable landing craft. From the air, it looks like the largest invasion force ever assembled. From the ground, it's rubber and plywood and hot air. Literally. Your job is monitoring German intelligence assessments, watching for any sign they've seen through the deception. Each morning brings fresh intercepts from Abwehr agents, Wehrmacht intelligence officers, Luftwaffe reconnaissance reports. You read them with your heart in your throat, looking for the phrase that would mean disaster. Normandy is the real target. Instead, you find beautiful German certainty. Massive build-up continues in southeast England. One message reports, Patton's army group estimated at 150,000 men. The real number is 0, unless you count the radio operators simulating an entire army's worth of communications and the stagehands maintaining the theatrical props. Look at this. Margaret shows you a decrypt from Rommel himself. He's requesting more divisions for Calais. He's actually worried we're going to invade exactly where we want him to think we're invading. The quirky historical detail that rarely makes the accounts. The deception was so thorough that some Allied personnel believed it too. A clerk in Dover, tasked with creating fake radio traffic, became convinced she was supporting a real invasion and had a nervous breakdown when she couldn't find the units she was supposed to be communicating with. It took a senior officer to gently explain that her inability to find the 79th Infantry Division was because it existed only in her transmissions and German paranoia. The work requires a peculiar kind of double-think. You're reading German intelligence reports that you know are based on false information that you helped create. It's like watching someone navigate using a map you've deliberately filled with fictional landmarks, holding your breath each time they check their position against your imaginary geography. Juan Pujol Garcia, Agent Garbo to the British, Agent Arabelle to the Germans, is the star of this shadow play. His reports to his German handlers are masterpieces of creative fiction, mixed with just enough truth to maintain credibility. You read his messages after they've been encrypted by the Germans and transmitted to Berlin, watching your own lies come back to you transformed by enemy analysis. James. The fascinating thing, says a psychological warfare specialist attached to your unit, is that the Germans want to believe Calais is the target. It makes sense to them. Shortest crossing, best beaches for armour, closest to Germany. We're not convincing them of something unlikely. We're reinforcing their own assumptions. Historians still debate whether the Germans were genuinely fooled or whether some suspected the truth but couldn't convince their superiors. Reading the intercepts, you see both. Junior intelligence officers occasionally questioning the Calais focus. Senior commanders dismissing their concerns with German certainty that they understand Allied thinking. The tension builds as D-Day approaches. Every German message is scrutinized for signs of revelation. A reconnaissance flight over Normandy sends everyone into quiet panic until the intercepts reveal they saw only what they expected. A quiet sector with no invasion preparations. Because, of course, the real preparations are hidden under camouflage netting, conducted at night, disguised as routine training. 3 days before the invasion, catastrophe nearly strikes out. A German message mentions unusual radio patterns suggesting possible deception operation. Your blood freezes. Have they seen through FUSAG? Recognize the theatrical nature of Patton's Phantom Army. 24 agonizing hours later, the follow-up comes through. The suspicious radio patterns have been analyzed and determined to be American radio operators' poor discipline and tendency to chit-chat. The German conclusion: typical American sloppiness, no intelligence value. You actually laugh, nervous, relieved laughter that sounds slightly unhinged. D-Day -1. The map room is electric with tension. Everyone knows tomorrow is the day, though no one's supposed to know. You're reading German deployments obsessively. The bulk of their armor remains near Calais. Their best divisions are in the wrong place. The deception has held. Whatever happens tomorrow, Bevan says quietly, we've given our boys the best chance possible. The Germans are looking the wrong way. That night, you can't sleep. Somewhere across the channel, hundreds of thousands of men are preparing to storm beaches that German intelligence barely considers worth defending. You've read Wehrmacht assessments dismissing Normandy as unsuitable for major operations. You've decoded orders keeping panzer divisions in reserve near Calais. You've watched the enemy stare at shadows, while the real threat gathered in plain sight. The peculiar guilt of intelligence work hits hard. Men will die tomorrow. Allied men storming beaches. German men defending the wrong coast. Some of those German deaths will come from following orders based on intelligence you helped falsify. It's war. It's necessary. It's still horrible. You're not pulling triggers, but your work puts bullets in trajectories just as surely as any sniper. June 6th arrives grey and windy. The first reports come through not from Allied sources, but from German panic. Major landing operations underway Normandy sector. This is not a feint. Repeat, this is not a feint. Even then, even with Allied soldiers on French beaches, some German commanders remain convinced the real invasion will come at Calais. You spend D-Day reading German confusion in real time, orders, counter-orders, arguments conducted in encrypted messages. One panzer division receives 3 different deployment commands in 6 hours as German High Command argues about whether Normandy is the main thrust or a diversion. By the time they decide, it's too late. The Allies have their foothold. We did it, someone says quietly, as the day's intelligence summary confirms German forces remain focused on Calais. We actually did it. But the work isn't over. The deception must continue. Patton's Phantom Army must keep threatening Calais until the Normandy beachhead is secure. You return to crafting lies within lies, maintaining the fiction that saves lives. It's exhausting, exhilarating, and morally complex in ways that will take years to fully process. But today, on the most important day, the magic trick worked. The Germans looked where you pointed while history pivoted on Norman sand. VE Day arrives like a thunderclap after a storm everyone forgot was supposed to end. May the 8th, 1945, and the corridors of Bletchley Park echo with a strange mixture of jubilation and disorientation. You've been reading German military traffic for so long that the sudden silence feels wrong, like a clock that stopped ticking after years of marking every second of danger. The celebrations are subdued, at least at first. How do you celebrate a victory you can't talk about? The rest of Britain is dancing in the streets, but Bletchley's 10,000 souls are bound by oaths that won't expire for decades. You've won the intelligence war, shortened the conflict by years according to whispered estimates, saved countless lives, and you can't tell a soul. Bit anticlimactic, isn't it? Diana says, finding you in Hut 6 staring at abandoned Enigma machines. All those years of work, and it just stops. The German surrender means no more coded messages, no more night shifts racing against dawn, no more choosing which intelligence to act on and which to let pass. The machinery of secrecy that consumed your life is suddenly purposeless. Bomb machines that yesterday hunted U-boats now sit silent. Folders marked Ultra, Most Secret, have become historical artifacts overnight. What makes it harder is the official story being constructed around you. Newspapers credit radar for winning the Battle of Britain, ignoring that you knew when and where every raid was coming. Historians praise Montgomery's tactical genius at El Alamein, unaware he was reading Rommel's orders. The Battle of the Atlantic was won by brave convoy escorts and improving technology, not by pinpointing U-boat positions from decoded messages. We're being written out of history as it's being written. Someone observes bitterly. Rather poetic, really. We decoded their secrets. Now we're becoming one. The bureaucracy of peace proves almost as complex as the mechanics of war. Orders arrive daily. Burn this, archive that, forget everything. The great bonfire begins in the mansion's grounds, millions of documents feeding flames that reach toward the sky like prayers. Years of work reduced to ash and smoke. You watch intercepts you sweated over, messages that saved lives and sank ships, curl and blacken and disappear. But some things can't be burned. The knowledge sits in your head like unexploded ordnance. You know which French resistance networks were compromised but couldn't be warned. You know which Allied operations the Germans anticipated but succeeded anyway through sheer courage. You know 1,000 small tragedies and triumphs that will never make the history books. The disbanding happens with military efficiency. Section by section, hut by hut, Bletchley Park is dismantled. The Wrens who operated the bombs are reassigned to typing pools where they'll pretend they spent the war filing routine naval correspondence. Mathematicians who broke unbreakable codes return to universities where they'll teach calculus and say nothing. You're given a demobilization date and strict instructions. Resume your pre-war life. Never speak of this place. Forget you were ever here. As if we could forget, Turing says during one of the farewell gatherings. He looks older, worn by years of impossible pressure. They want us to pretend we're the same people who arrived here, but we've seen behind the curtain. We know how thin the line is between victory and defeat, how much depends on human error and lucky guesses dressed up as strategy. The quirky, historical detail that captures the absurdity. You're required to sign yet another copy of the Official Secrets Act on your way out, as if the previous 17 signatures might have worn off. The security officer who processes your departure looks about 12 and clearly has no idea what Bletchley Park actually did. Important work, I'm sure, he says blandly, stamping your papers. All very hush-hush. You want to laugh or cry, possibly both. Romances that survived the war now face peace. Couples who met over cipher machines must invent cover stories for their families. How did you meet? Becomes a question requiring careful fiction. Some relationships don't survive the transition. Without the shared secret, what's left? Others grow stronger, bound by what they can't share with anyone else. The Spanish flu pandemic after World War I killed millions who survived the trenches. There's a similar casualty rate here, less visible but real. Some codebreakers can't adjust to civilian life where problems have unclear solutions and victories go unliberated. The woman who broke the message that saved Malta drinks herself to death within 2 years. A brilliant mathematician who designed statistical attacks on Enigma commits suicide, leaving a note in cipher that takes his colleagues days to decode. No more secrets. You clear your desk, packing the few personal items you're allowed to keep. No papers, of course, no photographs of the huts, nothing that could hint at what happened here, just a chess set someone gave you, a scarf knitted by a wren during night shifts, a coffee mug with a chip that you've drunk from every morning for 3 years. Ordinary objects invested with extraordinary memories. The train station at Bletchley is crowded with departing workers, all maintaining the fiction that they don't know each other. You share a compartment with people you've worked alongside for years, and nobody speaks beyond pleasantries about the weather. Only the eyes give it away, the shared glances that say, "We were here, we did this, we mattered." Historians still argue about the immediate post-war period at Bletchley Park. Some call it abandonment, leaving thousands of people to carry unbearable secrets alone. Others see it as necessary security, protecting methods that would be crucial in future conflicts. Living through it, you just feel hollow, like a violin with its strings cut. London looks the same but different when you return. Bomb damage you remember from your last leave, but now you know which raids you could have prevented if Ultra hadn't needed protecting. You pass a memorial to merchant sailors and think of convoys you tracked, ships you couldn't save. Every newspaper headline about the war's end is a lie of omission, and you helped write it. So what did you do during the war? Becomes the question you'll dodge for decades. Oh, clerical work, very dull, nothing worth mentioning. The lie comes easier each time, until it almost feels true, almost. Your landlady welcomes you back with questions about your government work. You give her the vaguest possible answers and escape to your room. On the wall, a Picasso print you'd forgotten, all angles and contradictions, nothing quite what it seems, rather appropriate, really. You've spent years turning chaos into meaning, and now you must turn meaning back into chaos, hiding truth behind pleasant fiction. The war is over, your war, the shadow war of intercepts and frequencies, of mechanical rotors and human weakness, officially never happened. Tomorrow, you'll start pretending to be normal, to care about normal things, to live a life unshaded by terrible knowledge. Tonight, though, you sit at your window watching the celebrations, holding your chipped mug like a talisman, remembering a place that's already being erased from history, even as its echoes will shape the future in ways the celebrants below can't imagine. Victory tastes like ash and secrets. You suspect it always has. 30 years have passed like water through cupped hands. It's 1975, and you're sitting in a London bookshop as the author reads from a book that shouldn't exist. The Ultra Secret, by Frederick Winterbotham, has blown the lid off Bletchley Park, and you're watching the world discover what you've carried in silence since you were young and brilliant and stupid enough to think you were just solving puzzles. Your hands shake slightly as you hold your copy, Not from age, though 60-something feels ancient after believing you wouldn't survive the war, but from the surreal experience of seeing your life's greatest secret printed in neat typeface, available for anyone with a few pounds to spend. Around you, people gasp at revelations that have lived in your bones for 3 decades. The existence of ultra-intelligence was the war's best-kept secret. Winterbottom reads, and you almost laugh. Best kept? You've kept it through marriage, divorce, career changes, your children asking why you sometimes stare at nothing with that 1,000-yard look. You've kept it through dinner parties where historians pontificated about the war while you bit your tongue bloody. You've kept it through nightmares where you decode messages about ships that are already sinking. After the reading, you approach Winterbottom. He's older, greyer, but his eyes still have that Bletchley sharpness. Hut 6, you say quietly, 1942 to 45. His face transforms. My God, how many of us are left? Not many, is the answer. Some died taking their secrets to the grave. Others are scattered across the world, probably having their own surreal moments in bookshops from Sydney to San Francisco. A few ended up in GCHQ, the government's post-war code-breaking establishment, trading enigma for Soviet ciphers, but most just disappeared into ordinary lives. Extraordinary past hidden under decades of mundane present. The book changes everything and nothing. Your children finally understand why you insisted they learn chess, why you do crosswords obsessively, why certain dates make you go quiet, but they can't really understand, can't grasp what it was like to be 23 and reading tomorrow's casualties over breakfast. The cultural context is gone, that peculiar mixture of brilliance and amateurism, of world-saving work done in garden sheds by people who thought a good background for code-breaking was ancient Greek poetry. You start meeting other Bletchley veterans, drawn together by the gravitational pull of shared secrets finally speakable. The reunions are strange affairs, elderly people politely eating cake while casually discussing how they shortened the war by 2 years. Remember when we broke the Africa Corps cipher? Becomes small talk. Whatever happened to that young man who decoded Japanese weather reports in haiku form? He became a banker, apparently, and still writes poetry no one understands. The quirky historical footnote. Many veterans can't break the habit of secrecy, even after the revelation. You find yourself automatically deflecting questions, giving vague answers, maintaining cover stories that no longer serve any purpose. One woman admits she still tells people she was a secretary during the war. It's been my story so long. The truth feels like lying, she says. Museums want your memories now. Historians come calling with tape recorders and reverent expressions. The narrative they're constructing is heroic, simplified, sometimes barely recognizable. They want eureka moments and clear victories, not the messy reality of brilliant failures and lucky accidents. They definitely don't want to hear about the intelligence you couldn't use, the people you let die to protect Ultra. We're becoming monuments, Diana observes at one reunion. She's right. The complex, flawed, sometimes petty humans you were are being bronze cast into history. The official narrative has no room for the clerk who broke a crucial cipher while drunk, or the professor who spent more time on academic feuds than German codes, or the way you all quietly agreed to ignore that one of your best analysts was obviously a Soviet spy because he was too useful to lose. Bletchley Park itself is falling apart. You make a pilgrimage and find the huts rotting, the mansions subdivided, the whole place looking like what it is, an abandoned government facility slowly returning to Earth. The bombs are long gone, sold for scrap. Hut 6, where you sweated through night shifts, is being used to store building supplies. You stand where your desk was, trying to reconcile memory with reality, and fail. But technology has moved on in ways that vindicate your work. The principles Turing developed for the bombs evolved into modern computers. The statistical methods you pioneered became the foundation of information theory. That bizarre wartime moment when mathematicians and crossword enthusiasts and classics professors came together to fight Nazis with pencils and paper. It changed everything, created the digital age. Though none of you knew it at the time, you give talks now, carefully sanitized versions of the truth suitable for historical societies and school groups. You explain Enigma machines to children who can't imagine a world without instant global communication. You describe the pressure of code breaking to audiences who've never known existential national threat. It's like describing color to the blind. Necessary but inadequate. The hardest questions come from young historians who want to understand the moral dimensions. How did you choose which intelligence to act on? How did you live with the knowledge of coming attacks? How do you feel about the German operators whose human errors you exploited? Young men, some of them, barely out of school, whose laziness or loneliness led to their deaths. We did what was necessary, you say, the standard answer that explains nothing. The truth is more complex. You were young and brilliant and drunk on the power of secret knowledge. You were patriots and puzzlers, heroes and voyeurs reading other people's mail. You saved lives and sacrificed others and made choices no one should have to make. And you did it all while pretending to be filing clerks. The legacy spreads in unexpected ways. GCHQ recruits by puzzle, just like Bletchley did. The NSA in America follows protocols you helped develop. Every time someone mentions signals intelligence or traffic analysis, they're using concepts forged in those freezing huts. When computers crack encryption in milliseconds that took you days, they're your intellectual grandchildren. But the real legacy might be simpler. Proof that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when history demands it. That a gay mathematician and a debutante and a chess champion and hundreds of others can come together in secrecy and change the world through sheer intellectual effort. That sometimes the greatest battles are fought not with bullets, but with pencils. Not on battlefields, but in the space between what is said and what is meant. Historians still argue about Bletchley Park's impact, whether it really shortened the war, whether the Germans would have lost anyway, whether the secrecy was worth the cost. But sitting in that bookshop, watching the world discover what you've always known, you understand that the arguments miss the point. Bletchley Park wasn't just about breaking codes. It was about breaking the assumption that wars are won only by warriors, that intelligence matters less than force, that the teenage girl operating a bomb-machine at 3 a.m. wasn't as crucial as the pilot dropping bombs. You were there. You know the truth. And finally, after 30 years of silence, you can tell it. Even if no one who wasn't there will ever really understand what it was like to be young and scared and brilliant, racing against time to pull meaning from chaos while the world burned around you. Even if the monument they're building on your memories looks nothing like the messy, human, impossible place where you came of age in the shadow of secrets. The bookshop empties. Winterbottom signs your copy with hands that once held ultra-intelligence. You walk out into London twilight, past buildings rebuilt from bombing you couldn't prevent, toward a future shaped by computing principles you helped discover. The secret is out. The war is long over. But somewhere in your mind, 5-letter groups still dance their encrypted waltz. waiting to resolve into meaning, reminding you of when you were young and the world could be saved by solving puzzles in the dark. As you walk home through London streets, the weight of decades finally lifting, you realize that keeping the secret wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was that nobody knew to thank you, to thank any of you, for the silent victories and invisible sacrifices. But perhaps that's fitting. Bletchley Park was always about the space between what appears to be and what is, about finding truth hidden in plain sight, about ordinary people doing impossible things because they had to. You did what was necessary. You solved the puzzles. You kept the secrets. You helped win a war with your mind. And now, at last, the world knows that sometimes the greatest warriors never fire a shot. They just sit in cold huts, drink terrible tea, and refuse to let the codes win. The evening air is soft, carrying the scent of normalcy you fought to preserve. Somewhere, a clock tower chimes the hour, no longer marking deadly time, just time. You've earned your rest, earned your peace, earned the right to finally tell your grandchildren what you really did in the war. Tomorrow, you'll start sharing the stories properly, the human details that make history live. Tonight, though, you simply walk through a city at peace, carrying lighter secrets, remembering when you were young and brilliant and helped save the world one decoded message at a time. The codes are broken. The secret is told. You can finally, truly rest.